Hey, welcome. After our children began to experience improvements and their health began to stabilize, my husband was offered a job to work with a colleague in Florida. We were living in Utah at the time and decided it was the right thing for our family and headed to Florida. So after we'd been there about a year, I was made aware of a position with the National Diabetes Prevention Program, also called DPP, where they were looking for someone to start the program for them there, and I jumped at the opportunity. You may be thinking, wait, what does this have to do with herbs? Well, hang with me. My first degree at the University of Utah was in public relations, and I've worked in a lot of nonprofit organizations over the years, helping young people, improving access to education, working with disabilities, health, etc. My work has always been driven by passion to help others. During this interview, I was asked, why are you so interested in diabetes prevention? And I told them about my grandfather. When I was 6 years old, he had a massive heart attack and then was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, which he battled over the course of the remaining years of his life. He was diagnosed at a time when our country didn't know a lot about it. And there was a lot of misinformation on health out there. We were told at that time to use margarine and processed oils and sugar substitutes and to go low fat, all of which were actually causing more harm. And my grandfather's health just deteriorated and deteriorated and deteriorated to the point where he was forced into early retirement, and he passed away just a few short weeks after my husband and I were married. He wasn't even well enough to attend our ceremony, which broke my heart. Many times over the 15 years that he lived after that initial massive heart attack, I remember sitting with him after he'd gotten back from doctor's appointments, and I'd ask him how they went and what the doctors were doing. He explained to me that he had enrolled in a number of studies with researchers who were trying to learn more about type 2 diabetes. And he said, I don't want this disease to take the lives of any of my grandchildren. So I enroll in any study I can to help them learn everything they need so that they can stop this disease in its tracks, because it has robbed me of the time that I wanted to have with my family and my loved ones and doing the things that I love to do. That decision he made to take his experience and help others has just stuck with me. And I've always been so grateful that my grandfather was willing to spend his time doing that. No one who cared for him took his condition lightly. My mother was trained in nutrition in college and spent a lot of time and energy learning as much as she could to help him. My grandmother was also eventually diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And because hers was so much later, and because of what we learned from my grandfather, she was able to eventually get hers under control. She didn't even have to use medication after many years because she'd made dietary changes and did the work to stay active. So I understood how important lifestyle changes were when it came to preventing and helping reduce mortality in diabetes. Well, I got the job and became the driving force for that program in that part of Florida. I interacted with and educated a lot of doctors and nurses, healthcare providers, and insurance agencies on the prevalence of prediabetes and the resources that helped. And that program grew rapidly across the United States. At the same time, I was also the first coach to bring numerous individuals through the DPP 17-week lifestyle change program in that area. And that program was where we were seeing individuals reduce their chances of developing diabetes by as much as 50% when they made and maintained the changes being taught. It was a remarkable experience. Part of the presentation I used to introduce healthcare practitioners to this program and encourage them to enroll their patients and their clients included CDC data on obesity and type 2 diabetes collected from 1994 to the present. I have those slides from the CDC and I want to show them to you today. So if you're listening to this and not able to see it, I'm going to put a link to these slides in the show notes, and I'd love for you to go look at them. So keep in mind, my grandfather was diagnosed in 1980. I'm going to share this slide with these with you. Oops, excuse me, give me just a minute to get my cursor to behave, right? Okay, so my grandfather was diagnosed in 1980, and this data starts in 1994, so 14 years after he was diagnosed and just a couple of years before he died. Researchers have found a direct correlation between the incidence of obesity and the incidence of diabetes, or the prevalence of the two of them are directly tied across the United States, so that you can see that in 1994 we had a really large amount of the population that was not obese. And that was not dealing with type 2 diabetes. We had less than 7% rate of obesity in the country, and I think even less than 4% of the country was dealing with type 2 diabetes. But we're seeing this nudge, the rise in obesity. In 1995, you see that? We start to see a change. You see that Alaska begins to jump in the obesity category. We've got about 22 to 25% of the population in Alaska that's obese. That's a pretty big number. California is starting to get up there a little higher in the diabetes range, and a lot of these southern states are also. I'm going to just kind of flip through here, and you can see the map begin to change pretty dramatically in just a year. Suddenly we jump from less to 14% of the population being obese in just a year's time, and we now have half the states with 14 to 18% of their population is considered obese. Isn't that crazy? And in some areas, we're seeing 22% of the population as obese. And we're starting to see type 2 diabetes rise in 1996, 97, 98. For the year 2000, which you'll see here, we have a pretty significant jump in the percentage of the population that is obese. We've got Texas, we've got a lot of the deep south that are seeing between 22 and 26% of their population is considered obese, which is defined as a BMI over 30. And then we're seeing diabetes rates climb as well from there. From where we had 4.5% or under 4.5% of the population across the country, we're now seeing 6%, 7%, 8%, 9% of the population in certain areas with type 2 diabetes. Huge jumps in 2001, 2002, 2003. We're seeing huge changes in the colors of this map, and we're starting to see that in the deep south, we've got over 25% of the population is considered obese. And we're starting to see those diabetes rates climb almost in hot pursuit of that obesity rate. In another year's time, we've got another huge portion of the deep south and the mid-Atlantic regions that are starting to experience the same thing, with more than 26% of their population is considered obese. So 2006, at the same time, we're seeing those type 2 diabetes rates climb and climb and climb. So by now, we're 28 years after my grandfather was diagnosed, and over 10 years after he's passed from this disease, and the obesity rates in half of the country are 26%. So more than half of the states in our country have more than 25% of the population documented as obese. That's a lot of people, and more than 10% of the population is type 2 diabetic in 2008. 2009, we see big jumps. 2010, and then in 2011, major changes to the survey method are made, and we start to see a more realistic map of those who are suffering from type 2 diabetes. Look at that. We have greater than 9% in over half the country. And a majority of the states have that greater than 25% obesity rates in their population. And that pattern continues all the way to 2014. In 2015 is where this map progression ends. So you can see the age-related prevalence of obesity and diagnosed diabetes among U.S. adults from 1994 to 2000 to 2015. And then diabetes the same. You can see the colors are changing right along with it. It's a pretty sobering thing to watch. I'll have that up on my website and in a video so you can watch it as well. And you can find those on the CDC's website. So by 2016 and 2017, which I think is where our most recent data is, it's now broken down by age, and all age groups are still rising with a significant increase for the 64 to 75-year-old age group. We're looking at nearly 25% of the boomer population that are both obese and struggling with type 2 diabetes. Every time I would show these slides, the mood in the room would go from lighthearted, people cheering for their favorite state, to devastated with the changes that they had seen in the numbers in less than 20 years' time. It made people fans of the diabetes prevention program's efforts really fast. That 17-week program that I helped coach people through was in the early days of the health coaching boom that we have now. We taught them how to really look at and track the foods they were eating, the amount that they were eating compared to what the actual serving sizes should be, the differences in portion sizes over the years. You know, they've grown exponentially with our waistlines. That particular program really focused on fat reduction, a continuation of the low-fat diet trend from the late 90s and early 2000s. And we did see a lot of benefits, but it was a study and it was very prescripted. So it was the same across the country. So people could still find ways around things if they wanted to and eat a lot of junk, because a lot of candy and those types of things are considered low fat. I would come home at night and I would just be so overwhelmed and shocked, because I was coaching groups throughout the country or throughout the county several times a week. And I had a number of coaches that I was training to work with me. And we were partnering with a lot of healthcare organizations. And we were seeing hundreds of lives changed because of this program, but yet there was still more information that they hadn't been given about the importance of different types of fat, the importance of fiber, the importance of green vegetables, or just vegetables in general, and lean protein, and so many other resources that they could be using to keep themselves well. And so that was when I decided to go back to school, because I really wanted to be knowledgeable and to be a source of strength and a light to shine the way forward for other people as they were navigating these really dangerous chronic diseases. I had already seen someone I love lose their life, and so much of the quality of their life, to this disease, and that could have been prevented. And I didn't want to see other people experience the same thing. At the time that I was in this program, the CDC was projecting 1 out of every 3 people who were born after the year 2000 would have diabetes by the year 2030. And we're much closer to that right now in 2020 than we thought we would be. Why is this important? Well, part of it is because when we look at the statistics of this particular virus that is wreaking havoc across our world and across our country, the media, the healthcare experts keep saying that it's most deadly for those with underlying conditions. And those underlying conditions are these preventable chronic diseases that we have known about for more than 40 years. We have the tools, we have the knowledge, and it's time for us to step into a place where we take responsibility for the opportunity that we have to actually be well. So I apologize if this comes across as bold or harsh. Please understand I'm not condemning anyone who is struggling with these really tough things. I've been there. We're still battling right alongside many others. I just want you to know that you do have options. And you have an opportunity to be in charge of your health if you want it. And that's why I offer things like my Exhausted Women's Revolution and the free downloads of the foods that boost immunity, women's nutrition, and botanicals. And because I know that what we eat, how we eat, and what we do can make a big difference in our health. Thank you so much for joining me today. Be well.